Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Borderless Within. This is your host Ahmed Abdi, and today we have a special guest who is very dedicated to her work. She's a journalist, she's an editor, and the founder of Diaspora Africa, an independent community newsroom challenging African migration bias through journalism, research, and data. I welcome you, Amaka Obioji. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for coming into my little space. I usually like to start with asking who is Amaka.
I think I would describe myself as a multidisciplinary. Like, I do multiple things, but at the center of it all is community building and helping underrepresented voices find their voice through poetry, either through journalism, either through writing. So I'm an author of a poetry collection which I do, and I facilitate creative workshops and spaces for writers, especially like writers from migrant communities as well. And through my job at Diaspora Africa, I lead independent journalism projects by migrant and diaspora communities. So at the end, like at the center of it all is the communities, because I believe that when we tell our stories, it helps to change the narrative and combat the bias that has already existed within the African migrant community spaces. So I would describe myself as multidisciplinary, doing multiple things, but at the center of community.
Amazing, amazing. And in your journey by doing this, what kind of brought you to founding Diaspora Africa?
I was working as a journalist before I finally moved to England. Before that, conversations around migration has always been presented as crises. But until I became a migrant myself, I understood how painful these narratives are, especially like when it doesn't capture the every nuance and complexities of migration. So I think that is the foundation of starting my own independent newsroom. So it started from the idea of trying to like combat misinformation and bias that exists within my community. And I wanted to see more
Mm-hmm.
stories and more headlines that would like look deeper beyond the virality of crises that we encounter every day in news. And I wanted like stories that go beyond those headlines, stories that ask more questions, stories that kind of like use the voices of the communities, not just about reporting about these people, but about engaging these people to report about themselves. And that is how Diaspora Africa started. So we started as a community of migrant journalists living in the UK who started documenting about migration, moving away from the crisis framing that is normally found in the media and asking more deeper questions. Why are people moving? And is migration really a crisis? So I think that's
Mm.
why it started, and that's the idea behind it.
Okay, for you, do you feel that for you to take part of this type of project, or putting committing to such a project, do you feel that there was a specific moment or an experience for you to even uh, start such an initiative? Was it something that might have happened to you, or personally, that have had, contributed to you to get the energy of starting such a platform when you came to England for.
I wouldn't say there was like a particular thing that happened that started, but I think the main thing, and it's maybe just like the journalistic instinct in me as well as an
Okay.
individual about wanting to tell the right stories, using like a dedicated platform to tell the right stories. So there was no particular incident per se that said, oh, okay, this is it. But I have looked around, and it also like part of my, when I was also in uni, I was doing this research and I was studying like headlines, how migration headlines are framed. And I was trying to understand how like the global media ecosystem see migration, especially like when it comes to Africa. So it now sort of like it created this whole thing that there's no dedicated platform that is actually like fighting misinformation around migration. There are platforms that I mean contributes to the this conversation around like debunking misinformation, but then there is no like, okay, this is the core thing we want to do about misinformation around migration. And it's also something like I love doing as well. I love community, and I've always been like in community spaces. I have a lot of friends who are migrants from different places, and they all have the same stories, how they are shaped in the media, and how they would want to be able to write essays and give their own contribution regarding like things that are happening that the media has actually like distorted. So I said maybe we should just build a platform of our own whereby we as a community can have a media that, with the right steps, with the right editorial guidelines and the right people who would tell these stories, and then have this community that other people can join. So it's how we started. So it's kind of like I said, we started as a group of like journalists and migrants scattered around the world. I and my friend and my co-founder, who is also a migrant. So we kind of like built this platform and want people to also like through this platform see other stories, expand the narrative, because most of migration conversations are just like a single story, always fueling the same narrative. So we wanted to expand what we always hear in the media. And that was it. There was no like a very particular incident that said, okay, we really need to do this because this has happened. It's just
Okay.
like research and what I have witnessed so far, and also being a migrant at the center of it all, knowing that these are all lies. So who is going to debunk these conversations that is happening at the moment?
Who, from editors, from a journalist, perspective, who do you think controls, you know, how Africans are perceived uh, in all articles?
Um, like I said, I think the narrative. I'm going to focus on more of migration conversations or reports that happen, and because most of
Okay.
the big media, the big corporations that have money that backs these corporations, I think over the years, not even now, over the years, we have kind of like perceived African migration as a crisis, and because we keep on doing the same, recycling the same kind of reports, the same words, using words like invasion, flooding, migrants are flooding this place, migrants are invading this place. So this sort of like words repeatedly used in articles and reports sort of have kind of like become norm, and it has kind of shaped the idea of people looking at migration from a place of crisis. And I wouldn't say who holds the power, but the thing is that whoever has the more money and influence that can be able to like control the narrative a media organization or a newsroom can have also controls the amount of information, the kind of information that would come from those newsrooms. So we have seen some
Mm.
newsrooms that are far right. So if they are being maybe funded by far right ideologists, for example, obviously their reports would come from that place because they would definitely
Mm.
lean towards the founders ideology. Not saying that all newsrooms kind of like lean towards the founders ideology. There are still newsrooms that still like do the work independently without any attachment. But the thing is that we have seen multiple of these reports circulating. Sometimes most of these reports are coming from people who do not even interact with the community that they are reporting about. So you see someone maybe be in their office and writing about an incident that is happening in, let's say, maybe the crisis happening in Sudan, and someone in California is doing that report, and they have never done a field work with those communities, for instance. So how would they capture the the realities of these people when they have never have conversation, they have never done field reporting, they have never engaged with certain communities? And that's why for
Mm.
Diaspora Africa, what we are doing is we run a cross-border newsroom where we work with journalists in Africa and journalists outside of Africa. So we create this connection of knowledge and research, and we share it among each other. So even if someone is in London, for example, writing about a news report, we have a correspondent that is in, let's say, Sudan or Congo, that is there with the people, and it's more like collaboratively we do those reports so that we have good insights into what is happening on ground. And it's just the way. So it's more about who controls the narrative. But the thing is that who big corporations have
Mm.
the backing and the funding to do more news at larger scale. They have the resources to
Mm.
distribute this news, and they have the influence as well to also push those narratives amongst communities.
Mm.
So I would just say that, well, if you have the resources, the right influence, it is always easier to control what people would see. But that doesn't mean that communities like ours are powerless. When we come together and debunk these misconceptions, we can do it. We have the numbers, we have the influence as well. So, and that's why, like I said, community is power. We just need to tap into what we have. We might not have the funding, but we have ourselves, each other,
Mm.
to debunk conversations
Absolutely.
like that.
And that's why I love Diaspora Africa. You know, I read it myself, and absolutely, just like you said, the the amount of power that you get from the community is huge, and it is impactful, even though the funding might not be there. Just by having people, because if that's where you are, you know, you're a bridge. You're a bridge between Africa and the bridge, between Africa and Europe, which is, it's very valuable. And this takes me actually to the next question. And you know, as an African diaspora myself, we see many times us Africans who might have been born and raised here, not knowing too much of or getting the right information about Africa. And we might, turn to the main global mainstream, narratives. How would you, or what would be the best way or technique or the tool to uh, wake people up, people of African roots, and say that, hey, listen, this is another narrative. You should, stick to this, because it's always about, poverty. It's always about conflict. It's all about, crisis instead of innovation, instead of culture, instead of an opportunity in the continent, what would be the best way to, um, yeah, turn people to these types of narratives and these types of platforms? What would be the best way, do you think?
So I would say I will use the style that works for me. So whenever I want to understand about a certain group of people and like the complexities around them or what they are experiencing, I sort of like pause from the noise and look for dedicated platforms that talks about these people. I mean, it's a kind of like something you have to do over time because a lot of misinformation is out there in the news industry. And I mean, there's people are always saying that they don't even trust news anymore because they don't know if it is bias or if it is fraud by
Mm-hmm.
misconception. But like there's a way to step away from the the mainstream noise and look for community. For me, I feel like community focused media are more would have more to give, especially like when it has to do with a certain group of people. So if I'm trying to understand something about migrants' lives in, let's say, India or somewhere, I just research, try to find out about core newsrooms that actually engage directly with those people. There are so many of
Mm.
them. Independent, community focused newsrooms are so many in the world. It's just to find the right people telling the right stories. And in the age of social media, I know like there's so many noise, there's so many ideas. Everyone is pushing out content and you do not know what to take away from it. But it's also important that we do our own research as well and we form our own thoughts because in an era where there is so much to read or so much to watch or so many viral videos to like see, you might begin to confuse someone else biased opinion as the right thing as your own thoughts. So away from the social media, from the noise, it's always good to ask deeper questions. So if you see a report, for instance, it's always good to question that report. Is this report actually true? Try to get multiple versions of this report. Try to, if you, I mean, there's social media, you can actually like go online and see individuals living in those locations, and you can engage them in these conversations as well to see to get the exact narrative or at least something close to what is actually happening about them. And I also tell people that community groups are very powerful. When I moved to England, I was looking for Nigerian community, African community groups. There was a lot of them because London is multicultural. There's so many things happening here, and I have to like go
Mm.
through. I was going to some events, so when I get to the events, I try to observe and see how this community operates. What's their ideology? What do they stand for? And if it's something that aligns with what I'm looking for, then I participate more often. So it's more about also stepping away from news and online and just going to having communities. I love community spaces.
Mm.
I host many myself as well. So I bring groups together and we sit down and we talk. So when these ideas and exchange are happening, you will learn something. And people are always, I believe that the most
Mm.
important conversation is when people are sharing based on their own experiences. So I grew up in Nigeria. I was born in Nigeria. I have a lot of friends who were born and raised in the UK. They have never been to Nigeria before. And the idea of what they have about Nigeria is about poverty, is about crisis, which to some extent those things exist. But the thing is that when we make one single story the only story that is accessible, it becomes bad. So as someone who grew up in that region, it is now my responsibility to also tell them, expand their expand the narrative. Yes, this exists, but then this exists, this also exists. Multiple things can
Mm,
exist
mm,
in one country. And so that's the thing about getting into communities, interacting with those communities, being in those spaces where those conversations are being made. So it fuels, at least it gives you a broad version of a place, of certain people. So instead of relying on one story, you get multiple versions of it. So you can say, oh, there's corruption and this, but then there are so many loving people. There are these hardworking people. So like there can be so many things coming out from one place. So I think
mm.
that would be like something I would do, which I
Well,
also feel like it would benefit other people.
absolutely. So, community focused media, community focused information, community focused platforms is something that really can help you. I want to get into the subject of identity and belonging, and you mentioned a little bit about Nigerians, for instance, that are born and raised in the UK or wherever now they are, and Africa as a whole, actually. And this is what I am talking about a lot. And there's an article that you wrote that was very interesting. It was when Jeff Kwarteng Jacobson visited Ghana. The whole text about it was just absolutely amazing. And that traditionally the second generation immigrants often grow up highly created version of their ancestral homelands and so forth. And I would like to read a little bit because you wrote this. So, for me, I'm just thinking we could go through it, and I would like uh, to hear a little bit about what you felt about this. But he says here that when he went back to Ghana, he said, it felt like I was beginning to understand my parents more deeply, how they grew up and what it meant that they built a life in Germany under very different conditions. That feeling stayed with me because it gave me a new perspective on my own life. It made me see that the opportunities and stability I grew up with were connected to sacrifice and effort that began before me. And this is the things that I talk about, the deeper conversation on dual identities, or the diaspora identity that we get. We get, two worlds uh, that is not aligning every time, and sometimes it's contradicting, and we don't really know where we are, you know where we belong in these two worlds and so forth. uh, did this story kind of surprise you while telling his story in a way, or what did you feel about his journey in Ghana and in between?
Um, I wouldn't say surprise because I have conversations like this every day. Like I host community workshops, so I get to talk to a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
people
of course, of
who
course.
have never moved who have never moved back to the country of their origin. I have so many people who have lived here all their life. They have never moved back. And sometimes someone is always curious asking me, okay, how is it like growing up in Nigeria? And we kind of like trade our experiences about growing up. But the thing I've also noticed about our parents of these second generation migrants as well is that one thing stands for them. They carry their culture and their identity and they pass it along their children. It might not be 100% because, I mean, there's the other influence of other cultures of where you are growing up and where you grew up. But they have like the language, they might not speak the local language fully, but they know some phrases and they can understand some phrases because they grew up around both parents who speak who speak to each other in that language and who also uses that language as a way to also like communicate with them to an extent. So I think for most diasporas who has never traveled back, I think the first thing is the feeling of excitement of finally wanting to go back to wherever they come from, or maybe their parents' country, and they have this feeling of excitement and then fear of the unknown, because I think the fear of the unknown is also about like what they have seen in news about where they come
Mm,
from. So they have this feeling like, oh, are you
mm,
sure they won't be when I travel? Oh, are you sure? Like, I was having this conversation around someone who wanted to go to Nigeria next year, and the Nigeria's election is next year, and you were like, oh, someone said that the election period is the wrong time to travel, and that's where is that coming from? Because these are how we kind of like fuel this misinformation, and they're like, why people travel every other time in the world. I have never seen someone tell me, oh, coming to the UK during the election is the worst time to. You don't even know if there's an
mm,
election in the UK until you go to your polling unit. But I understand where all those things come from. We have been conditioned
yeah.
in a way through the media to think that certain places, certain um, countries have this
Mm,
image, and that is how most of them are wired. But the good thing is that when they eventually travel and experience the people, experience the culture, experience the thing, they come back with a refreshed ideology. They come back saying, oh, I went here and I didn't see that. And I think it's also how, like I said earlier, how the media can shape us to think of certain people and certain places as dangerous when there's not even
yes.
like a single evidence to back that up. So
Mm,
for Jeff, that's his own experience. He went to Ghana eventually, and he saw his parents differently. He saw the sacrifices, because another thing is about people migrate for so many reasons. For first generation migrant who came here, it might be for economic opportunities. It might be for some people seeking protection or asylum. It can be so many things. There's different reason why people eventually like decide to leave their home and make another place their home. But whatever that the case is, the thing is that our home is still our home, our identity, our culture. Being somewhere else or being in another country doesn't mean that we should lose that identity, that culture. This makes us our who we are. So being Nigerian is what I am. It doesn't mean that living in the UK, I have like I can still assimilate into the within the system I find myself in, but that doesn't mean that I have to strip myself of my identity. So I believe I just feel like traveling home. I think it's an individual experience. Let me just like round it up this way. It's an individual experiences. Some people, but I've seen most cases people have this fulfilling experience by going back to their roots and seeing. I have never seen a diaspora that went home and say, "Oh, I regretted it." I mean, of course, things can be different, but then I see that a lot of people kind of like appreciate that um, realization that comes with going back to where you are from originally.
mm,
So I think
mm,
that's
mm.
if that answers the question, though.
Yes, no, it's true. I went to Somalia myself, and I remember it changed my life on how I saw, where my roots are and where what my culture. I start understanding, just like he said, I start understanding the sacrifice and the effort that my parents had to do in order for them to because they were displaced, they grew up somewhere where they come from, and then they have to move somewhere else, and now they are raising this kid, and try to make him understand where he's actually from, but he doesn't know anything else but the school and the streets that he sees and everything. So when you go back, it kind of, adjusts. It's like you start getting clarity, and you get aligned. Sorry guys, we got a little technical problem, but it's we're back on track. So Amaka, if you could erase one misconception about migration or African migration or Africa in general, from the minds of the people around the world, what would it be?
I would say the core misconception is thinking that migration is a crisis. So that's is one misconception I would want to erase. Migration is not a crisis. It is more like a just like a global issue that is manageable when controlled better with better policies. And another thing is that we have to stop leaning to the political framings of migration, anti far right ideologies that are used in political debates that always distorts migration and framing migration as crisis. So I think that's one core misconception I would want to change around people, even in the media as well. We need to get the reporting right. We need to also look at so many factors that encourages migration and also see how migration is also benefiting the host countries. So it's not just about framing migration as a crisis. We tend to look at the bad side, but we never shift the lens to see how migrant contribution are boosting the economy of these host countries and how they are benefiting more than they are losing, in my own opinion. So that should that's
Hmm,
my first conception that I am fighting. If I have
beautiful.
the influence of everyone's mindset.
Very good. Very nice. All right. That makes sense. So when future generations now look back at this moment in history, what would you hope that Diaspora Africa contributed to the world?
That's for Diaspora Africa. I want it to be like a platform that when you come in, if you have stories flying around the world and you want to get the real community response to those stories, I want Diaspora Africa to be the first place people think, okay, let's go here because they have better stories, because they understand this community better, because they use their community are also part of the correspondence that tells the stories for the
Hmm.
platform. So I am thinking about something like participatory journalism when our readers and audience can also contribute to the stories we tell on the platform. So it's not just about journalists trying to find stories. I want journalists and
Hmm.
our reporters and our contributors to also engage with our readers, because most of the conversations we are having, we have readers who are also living in that experience. So I want Diaspora Africa to be not just a news platform. I want it to be like a community of people who contributes, who reads and also contributes to the platform, not just about we dishing out information. I want our readers to also be part of the contributors and be part of the correspondents that also share their own stories. So that is what I want to do for Diaspora Africa, and that is also what I want the future generation to benefit from. So someone can wake up and say, "Oh, I have this story, or I have experienced this as a migrant, and I want to contribute to the storytelling in Diaspora Africa, so that other people would also learn from this experience."
Hmm. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much, Amaka, for coming into my little space. We will definitely read. We will definitely engage. We will do our best to also, share this with others. And I'm so grateful to have been having the experience to not only talk to you but also actually reading the articles and everything. And you're doing a great job, you and your whole team. I congratulate you for that. Thank you so
Thank
much for jumping in to my podcast.
No worries at all. It's a pleasure as well. And thank you for inviting me.
No problem. All right, I'll then say goodbye to you and good luck. I hope to see you soon again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.